He hadn't meant to capture it. The camera had always been his refuge, something to hide behind. A way to see without being seen. But that evening, when he lifted the lens toward the window to test a new angle of light, what appeared in the frame stopped his breath. There she was, his stepmother, standing by the garden fence. Her hand pressed against a man's chest, her face tilted toward his. The man wasn't his father. The distance between them was small, intimate. The kind that only exists between people who have forgotten they're being watched. He froze, the shutter half pressed. Part of him wanted to turn away, to pretend he hadn't seen it. But his finger moved on its own. The camera clicked once, capturing the lie in perfect focus. He didn't look at her when she came back inside later, pretending nothing had happened. She smiled, poured him tea, asked about his day. Her voice was calm, her movements deliberate. As if she had just returned from running errands instead of betraying the man who trusted her most. That night, he downloaded the photo. It sat on the screen, silent and damning. He zoomed in, his stomach tightening at every detail, the way her hand lingered on the man's shirt, the faint curve of her smile, the sunlight catching in her hair. It was beautiful, and that made it worse. He didn't sleep. The image burned behind his eyelids. By morning, he knew what he had to do. At breakfast, his father was cheerful, talking about plans for the weekend, while she moved around the kitchen, humming softly. The son watched them both, feeling like an intruder in his own home. He wanted to shout, to tear the photo from the camera and throw it in her face. But instead, he said nothing. Silence was sharper. Silence could cut. Over the next few days, he took more pictures, not of her with anyone else, but of moments she didn't notice. Her expression when his father kissed her cheek. The way her hand trembled when she read her phone. The guilt flickering across her eyes before she smoothed it away. He began collecting these fragments, piecing together her double life like a quiet investigator. When he finally showed the photos to her, it wasn't with anger. It was with calm precision. He spread them across the table one by one, watching her color drain as the story unfolded in front of her. "I didn't mean for you to find out," she whispered. "You didn't mean to get caught," he corrected. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "You don't understand. Your father doesn't look at me the way he used to. I just needed to feel seen." He laughed softly, though it didn't sound like laughter. "So you let someone else look at you instead." She reached for the photos, but he stopped her hand. "I already made copies," he said. "You should think carefully before you lie again." That night, he left the copies on his father's desk. He didn't stay to see what happened. By morning, the house was chaos. His father's voice rose and broke in ways he had never heard before. Her sobs echoed down the hall, desperate and hollow. Doors slammed, glass shattered. Then silence. When he finally stepped out of his room, she was gone. The front door stood open, her shoes left by the mat. His father sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photos as if they were ashes. "You took these?" the man asked. "Yes." A long pause. "Why?" He hesitated. "Because you deserved to know." His father nodded slowly, his eyes empty. "And now I do. Thank you." But the gratitude sounded like grief. Weeks passed. The photos remained on the desk until dust began to settle over them. He thought about deleting them, but couldn't. They weren't just evidence of her betrayal, they were proof of what silence can destroy. One evening, he took the camera again and walked to the garden. Standing by the same fence where it had all begun. The light was softer now, the air calm. He lifted the lens and took a photo of the empty space. This time, there were no lies in the frame, only absence. And somehow, that was harder to look at. The photo of her betrayal never stopped following him. Even after she was gone, it lingered, in his phone, on his camera, in his mind. It became the first thing he saw each morning, the last thing before sleep. The stillness of that image was unbearable, because it held everything that words could not. Deceit, desire, and the moment his world quietly collapsed. The father had changed since that day. He moved through the house like a ghost, not angry, not broken, just emptied out. He no longer played the radio while shaving, no longer whistled when tending the garden. He didn't even look at the camera when his son offered to take a new picture. "I don't want to remember myself like this," he said. The son didn't argue. He understood too well. Weeks went by before she reached out. One night, a message appeared on his phone. No greeting, no name, just, "You didn't have to show him." He stared at it for a long time, the glow of the screen cutting through the dark. Finally, he replied, he deserved to know. There was no response. But the next morning, he found an envelope in the mailbox. Inside was a single printed photo, the same one he had taken, but altered. The man's face was blurred, hers was not. On the back, she had written, "Now you're no better than me." His hands shook as he tore it in half. Yet her words stuck. He wanted to believe he'd done the right thing. That revealing her affair had been an act of justice, not vengeance. But justice shouldn't feel this hollow. That evening, he went to check on his father. The man was sitting at the kitchen table, the photos gone. A cup of cold coffee in front of him. "I talked to her," he said quietly. The son froze. "Why?" "She called to say she's sorry. I told her not to call again." The silence that followed was thick and heavy. The father finally looked up, his eyes weary but calm. "You know what I realized? There's no winning in this. Not for her, not for me, not for you. You took the truth and used it like a weapon. And it worked. But it didn't fix anything." The words stung. "I was trying to protect you," the son said. The father's expression softened. "You were trying to hurt her." He had no answer. That night, he sat in his room staring at the torn photo. The camera rested on the desk, the lens facing him like an eye that had seen too much. He wondered when truth had turned into cruelty. When righteousness had begun to feel like revenge. Later, he went outside. The garden was dark, the air heavy with the scent of rain. He lifted the camera and took another photo, not of people this time, but of the empty fence where she had once stood. The shutter clicked softly, and for a moment, he thought he heard her voice, not in words, but in the quiet between them. When he looked at the image afterward, it was nothing but shadows and light. No betrayal. No love, just emptiness. He printed it the next morning and left it on his father's desk. No caption, no explanation. The father found it hours later and stared for a long time before nodding once, as though he understood. Neither spoke of it again. But from that day on, the son stopped taking photographs of people. The lens had turned into a mirror, and he no longer wanted to see what it showed him. Winter came, slow and gray, pressing its quiet weight into every corner of the house. The father spoke even less now, and the son worked longer hours just to avoid the silence. Waiting at home. The air still held traces of her perfume, faint, fading, but never gone. It clung to the curtains, the hall, the back of his throat, like the scent of a memory that refused to leave. Sometimes the son dreamed of her standing in the garden again, Sunlight spilling over her face, the man's hand resting at her waist. He would wake with his heart pounding, the ghost of that image lingering behind his eyes. The photo had been destroyed long ago, but what it captured remained, alive, permanent. Inside him. One night the father broke the silence. "I heard from her," he said quietly, not looking up from his tea. The son froze. What did she want? "She sent a letter." He slid it across the table. "You should read it." The handwriting was familiar, careful, almost shy. "I don't expect to be forgiven," she wrote. "But I think about you both every day. I've started over somewhere quiet. Sometimes I see couples walking together and wonder if I could have saved what we had. If I'd told the truth before it was too late. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell my son I understand now. Revenge only hurts the one who carries it." He stared at the words, the ink trembling where her hand must have hesitated. He folded the paper once, twice, until the words disappeared into themselves. "She's trying to make peace," he said bitterly. "She's trying to live," his father replied. "We should do the same." But that was harder than it sounded. The son couldn't stop replaying everything, the moment she smiled at another man. The look on his father's face when he saw the truth, the sound of the door slamming behind her. He had thought exposing her would give him power, that the truth would cleanse him. Instead, it had poisoned them all. A week later, he took his camera and went out before dawn. The streets were empty, the sky heavy with the promise of snow. He walked for hours until he reached the edge of town, where the fields stretched wide and still. For the first time in months, he lifted the camera and began to shoot. He photographed everything, the frost on the grass, the thin line of light on the horizon, the distant figure of a woman walking alone along the road. He didn't know why he raised the lens toward her. He didn't even realize he was holding his breath until she turned slightly, her face blurred by distance and fog. When he developed the photo later, the image startled him. It wasn't her, not really, but something about it felt familiar. The way the light brushed the woman's hair, the way her shoulders curved inward. It was as if the past had walked quietly into the present, not to haunt him, but to ask if he was done punishing himself. That evening, he brought the photo to his father. The older man studied it for a long time. "She looks peaceful," he said softly. "She isn't her." "I know." A small smile. "But maybe it's time to let her be." The son didn't reply. He looked down at the photo again, so ordinary, so distant, so human. And for the first time, he didn't feel anger. Only an ache that was strangely gentle. Later that night, he stood by the window with the camera hanging from his hand. Snow had begun to fall, covering the garden, the fence. Every trace of where her betrayal had once lived. He took one last picture, of the untouched white, the stillness, the quiet forgiveness of the earth. It wasn't beauty he captured this time. It was something simpler, the way pain fades, not because it's forgotten, but because eventually, it has nowhere left to stay. Spring came with light that felt too bright for the house it entered. The snow melted, revealing the earth beneath, soft, dark, alive again. Yet inside, everything remained muted. The father moved slower now, his hands unsteady. His mind caught somewhere between the present and the weight of what had already been lost. The son stayed close, though their conversations were brief and quiet, built from habit more than need. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, the son found an envelope tucked between family albums. It was unmarked, yellowed at the edges. Inside were photographs, his own, from years ago. The same ones he had taken in silence, his stepmother at the fence. Her hand on another man's chest, her face turned away. But there were others, ones he didn't remember taking. Shots of the family together at dinner, at the park. On a Sunday morning when the light poured through the kitchen window. It was her in those photos too, but this time, she was smiling at them. At him. His hands trembled as he looked through them. She must have developed these before everything fell apart, kept them, maybe, as proof of the life she wanted to believe was still real. It struck him then how strange love was. How a person could build two worlds at once and lose both completely. When he showed the photos to his father later that evening, the older man didn't seem surprised. She took those, he said quietly. Found her camera after she left. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. She kept the lie and the truth, the son murmured. The father nodded. Most of us do. That night the son couldn't sleep. He spread the photographs across his bed, studying each one. Trying to decide which version of her was real, the woman who had betrayed them, or the one who had once made the house feel full of life. Maybe both, maybe neither. He remembered her laughter echoing through the kitchen, her voice calling him to dinner. Her soft hand brushing the hair from his face when he was younger. All of it was true. So was the moment she had stepped into another man's arms. Truth, he realized, was never clean. It was messy, human, full of contradictions. The next morning, he gathered the photos into two piles. One for the lies, one for the moments before them. But when he reached the last image, the three of them together in the garden, he couldn't decide where it belonged, so he kept it. He found his father sitting outside, looking at the empty fence where everything had started. The air smelled of soil and rain. Do you ever think she's still out there? The son asked. The father's gaze didn't shift. I think she was lost long before she left. They sat in silence for a long while. Then the son handed him the photo, the one he couldn't categorize. The father studied it for a moment, then smiled faintly. That was a good day, he said. It was, the son replied. Even if we didn't know what was coming. The father nodded. That's the thing about love. It always feels real in the moment. And that's what makes it worth remembering, even when it ends. Later that evening, the son placed the remaining photos in a small wooden box and buried it at the edge of the garden. Not as an act of grief but of release. As he covered the soil with his hands, he felt the earth give slightly beneath his palms, soft, forgiving. When he stood, the light had turned gold. The kind that made everything look tender for a few fleeting seconds. He looked at the house, at the fence, at the garden that kept growing no matter what had happened here. And for the first time, the memory of her didn't sting. It simply was. He lifted his camera and took a single photograph, not of her, not of betrayal, but of the garden as it was now. Whole, quiet, alive. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was remembrance. And somehow, that was enough. By the time summer arrived, the house had finally learned how to breathe again. The windows stayed open most days, letting in the soft hum of life outside, the whir of cicadas, the rustle of the garden that refused to stop growing. The son still lived there, taking care of his father, who had grown slower but lighter somehow. As if the years had worn away not just his strength but also his anger. They rarely spoke of her now. She had become more of a presence than a person. Lingering in the quiet, the way sunlight hit the kitchen counter. The faint scent of her old perfume that sometimes returned on rainy days. Time had turned her into something softer, almost kind. though neither of them would have dared call it forgiveness. One morning, while the father dozed in his chair, the son found himself going through the attic again. There was one box he hadn't opened, the one that had belonged to her. Inside, beneath some folded scarves and a stack of old notebooks, lay another camera. Not his own, hers. The battery was dead, but the memory card was still inside. He hesitated for a long time before turning it on. When the screen flickered to life, the images appeared one by one, snapshots of ordinary things. The garden after rain, the father fixing a broken chair, the son reading by the window. Unaware he was being watched. They weren't the photos of a liar. They were the photos of someone trying to remember what love looked like before she lost it. He scrolled further. Toward the end were pictures of the other man, the one from the fence. The one who had shattered everything. But even there, her smile looked tired, strained. As if she'd known, even then, that what she'd found wasn't escape, only repetition. He sat there for a long time, staring at the screen until the camera died again. Then he carried it downstairs and showed it to his father. "These are hers," he said softly. The older man studied the camera for a moment, then smiled faintly. She always said pictures made her feel less invisible. She wasn't invisible, the son said. She just wanted to be seen by the wrong people. The father nodded, the lines around his eyes deepening. That's the tragedy of it, isn't it? We look for meaning where we think love hides, instead of where it actually stays. That evening, the son walked into the garden with the camera. The same place where everything had ended. The air was thick with the scent of flowers and soil. He raised the lens toward the tree they had planted years ago, now tall and full. Its branches touching the fence. The last time he'd photographed this spot, it had been evidence of betrayal. Now, it was just life, still standing, still growing. He took one photo, then another. The sound of the shutter was different this time, not sharp, not accusing. It was gentle, like the closing of a story that no longer needed an ending. When he came back inside, the father was asleep. The son placed the camera on the table and sat beside him. The light from the window stretched long across the room, golden and soft, painting everything in forgiveness that didn't need to be spoken aloud. He thought about how much had been destroyed, and how much had quietly survived. In the years to come, he would keep both cameras. Not as proof, not as punishment, but as memory. Theirs had been a house built from mistakes, yes, but also from love. Even if neither had known how to hold it right. And sometimes, when the evening light turned gentle and the world felt still, he would lift one of the cameras and take a single photo, not to capture truth, but to honor what remained. Because in the end, that was what he had learned. Revenge fades, pain softens. But the image stays, of what once was, of what could have been. Of everything fragile and fleeting that makes us human. Autumn returned quietly, painting the garden in soft rust and gold. The leaves drifted across the fence where her betrayal had once been caught. Where his revenge had once begun. The house felt older now, gentler too, as though time had forgiven what people could not. The father's health had declined through the summer, and the son spent most days at his side. Their conversations were shorter, but warmer. The anger that had once filled the space between them had thinned. Replaced by something quieter, gratitude, perhaps. Or the peace that comes when there is nothing left to hide. One evening, the father asked him to bring the cameras. Both of them, his and hers. The son hesitated, but did as he asked. The older man turned them over in his trembling hands, smiling faintly. Do you remember what I told you? He said. That photos keep what the heart can't hold. The son nodded. I remember. She was many things, the father went on, his voice soft. Cruel, weak, lost. But she was also alive. And I think that's what she wanted you to see, not the lies. But the part of her that was still trying. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. They sat together in the fading light. The sound of the wind brushing through the garden like a memory. That night the father passed quietly in his sleep. There was no struggle, no noise, just stillness. As if the house itself was holding its breath. The son found him in the morning, the two cameras resting on the table beside him. The father's hand was open, as though he had tried to take one last picture of the dawn. The funeral was simple. Few came, and fewer spoke. Afterward, when everyone else had left, the son remained at the grave. A camera hanging at his side. He didn't cry. He had no tears left for loss, only a deep, steady ache that felt almost tender. That evening, he went back to the garden. The tree stood tall now, full in gold, its branches reaching toward the fading sun. He lifted the camera, her camera, and took one final photograph. The fence, the tree, the empty house in the background. The frame where love and betrayal had once collided, now quiet, unburdened. He printed the photo and placed it on the mantel beside the old one, the last picture of the three of them together, smiling before they knew how fragile it all was. He didn't label them. He didn't need to. As night fell, he walked outside once more. The air was cool, the ground damp with fallen leaves. He stood where the garden met the fence and whispered into the darkness, I forgive you. Both of you. No voice answered, only the soft hum of the wind through the branches. But in that sound, he felt something lift, not gone, not erased, but lighter. He buried both cameras beneath the tree, one beside the other. Their lenses facing upward toward the sky. And when he stood again, hands dirty, breath shaking, he realized that for the first time since the day he pressed that shutter, he no longer saw the image in his mind. Not the betrayal. Not the proof. Only the light. The house behind him glowed faintly through the windows, warm against the falling night. Inside, the photo on the mantel waited, not as evidence, not as pain, but as memory. A reminder that even the cruelest truths can fade into gentleness, if you let them. And as the wind moved through the trees, the son finally understood what the camera had always been trying to teach him. Some pictures aren't taken to keep the past alive. They're taken so we can finally let it go.